Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
Hi friends, it's Justin Brierley. Before we jump into today's show, I've some exciting news to share. The evidence for a rebirth of belief in God in the UK and beyond has been growing. Easter saw thousands of churches packed out, surveys are showing a remarkable upturn in church-going, and people are looking for God again. I believe the church is in a unique missional moment, and that's why I'd like to invite you to a conference, Responding to the Rebirth, taking place at All Souls Church London on Saturday the 22nd of November. Co-hosted by myself and Glenn Scrivener of Speak Life, we'll be joined by some very special guests and speakers as we help the church to be ready for this turning of the tide. This conference is for any Christian who wants to respond to the rebirth we're seeing. Ticketing will be available soon, but for now, mark your diary and plan to be with us on Saturday, the 22nd of November in London. More details to follow soon. For now, here's today's show.
Science fiction is becoming true in front of our eyes.
OpenAI released an early demo of ChatGPT.
ChatGPT. ChatGPT.
ChatGPT. The ChatGPT can now see, hear, and speak.
Hey ChatGPT, so you can talk now?
Yes, I can. What's on your mind, Alex?
And we're not quite sure whether this is a kind of beautiful, wonderful consummation of our longings or a terrible nightmare.
Is AI for replacing humanity? Is it for replacing human connection?
What we are potentially talking about is nothing less than the end of human history.
Are we looking at a sort of Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator, convergence event where the robots will take over, or is that really just the realm of sci-fi still?
I see the incarnation, if you like, as God's final vote of confidence in the original model, humanity, the Mark I human being. What has come home to me with new force is that, for 2,000 years, the Christian faith has said that God became flesh. And it's like we've known that for 2,000 years, but the import of why that is so important has become newly important in the 21st century.
If we got to a point where we kind of didn't have to create art or music or poetry or films because AI could just kind of do it for you, do we lose something in terms of what it means to be human almost at that point?
Hello there, and welcome back to the surprising rebirth of belief in God. I'm your host, Justin Brierley, delighted to be bringing you a live show today discussing the promise and perils of AI with Dr. and research scientist Professor John Wyatt, author of the book The Robot Will See You Now, Artificial Intelligence and the Christian Faith. Now, we cover so many issues in this conversation, the ways that AI is making a positive mark in some areas, but also the dangers of surrendering human industry, art, and even relationships to AI and technology. How can the Christian faith speak to the concerns that many people have about artificial intelligence? That's at the centre of our conversation today. And why are you talking about AI on the Surprising Rebirth podcast this week, Justin? You may be asking. Well, I wanted to include this conversation in this season because it just connects on so many levels with what I've written about and charted in the first season of the podcast around the meaning crisis in culture that only seems to be picking up speed with the digital and AI revolution that's underway. Now, as you'll hear me say later in our conversation, the church is fast becoming one of the few places where I think you can still find that genuine human community in all of its messiness. And I wonder if that may just be something that plays into the search for God going on again as I see it in the West at the moment. Remember, there's much more to explore from this show and beyond when you subscribe to the newsletter and when you become a monthly silver supporter of my work. That includes early access to episodes, videos, and bonus content. Gold supporters also get signed copies of both my books and the chance for a monthly catch-up with me too, if you'd like it. So as we head into this new season, your support is really appreciated. All the links for the newsletter and to support are with the show info. Now, as I mentioned last time, this season's show format is a bit of a mixture of documentary-style episodes, long-form interviews, and live shows. And a live show is what you're going to be hearing today, recorded in front of a live London audience at All Souls Church, Langham Place. And thanks to Pillar and Step, who hosted the I Am AI event, for permission to broadcast the event again here on the podcast. You can also find it on video over at our YouTube channel. As you'll hear, there will be a conversation between myself and John Wyatt, followed by audience Q&A. But we begin today's show with a keynote address from Professor John Wyatt asking, what does it mean to be human and what hope is there for the future? I hope you enjoy Season 2, Episode 11 of The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Well, thank you very much. So AI is here, and you are using it. Shop online, use a bank card in the store, Google some information, watch a Netflix movie, visit Instagram, Facebook, Spotify, TikTok, speak to Alexa, try out ChatGPT. AI is there behind the scenes, assessing, analyzing, monitoring, predicting, and what's more, manipulating your behavior. Use Google or Apple Maps, and AI is communicating with GPS satellites in space to calculate your best route. This is an image of the globe and how many satellites there are currently circulating the globe that are currently watching our planet. Get into your car, and AI-powered number plate recognition springs into action, checking out databases and informing the police that you haven't paid your fees or the DVLA. Walk into many retail outlets and covert AI-powered facial recognition will identify if you're a known shoplifter. If you apply for a job with a large company, AI will assess your CV and decide whether you should be shortlisted. Apply for a bank loan or a mortgage, and AI will evaluate your creditworthiness. So what exactly is it? What is artificial intelligence? Well, it's a vague term with many definitions. And for many of today's businesses, it's just become a marketing term. You know, we've got this wonderful new product, it's new, it's improved, and it's using AI. Even if it's an electric toothbrush, it's using AI. But the underlying idea of AI is using computer technology in order to copy and surpass many or most of the cognitive abilities, the thinking capabilities of human beings. It's an idea beloved of science fiction, but for the first time in history, it seems to be coming true. So for more than 100 years, novelists, film producers, dramatists have been dreaming and speculating about a world in which machines become as intelligent as human beings. But now, science fiction is becoming true in front of our eyes. And we're not quite sure whether this is a kind of beautiful, wonderful consummation of our longings or a terrible nightmare that we won't be able to control. Just in the last 18 months, the tech world has been abuzz because of explosive developments in a new form of software called generative AI. And these are mind-bogglingly complex programs that can create original text, audio, images, and video on the basis of patterns learned from vast amounts of training data. So ChatGPT was made available to the general public in December 2022, and it was the fastest growing internet service ever, reaching 100 million users 2 months after launch. And now OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, and other tech companies around the world are engaged in a desperate race to create generative programs which are ever more sophisticated, powerful, and human-like. And AIs are not only becoming scarily good at creating original text, but also images, videos, document design, architectural plans, music, computer code, you name it. We're moving into a world where we may never know whether an article, a script, a student essay, an image, a video, or a piece of music was created by a human being, a mindless AI system, or some combination of the two. There's no way of telling whether the words I'm speaking to you were generated by an AI system or a human being, so you'll just have to take my solemn word that no AI was involved. Bill Gates described recent developments in AI as being as fundamental as the creation of the microprocessor, the personal computer, the internet, the mobile phone, and the most important technological leap by humankind in decades. Eric Schmidt, co-founder of Google, said, generative AI is likely to transform the human cognitive process as it has not been shaken up since the invention of printing. And Sundar Pichai, the chief executive of Google, said, AI is probably the most important thing humanity has ever worked on. I think of it as something more profound than electricity or fire. So what do we make of these extraordinary statements? Is this just marketing hype? Or is there something behind these astonishing claims? Well, there's no doubt there's a lot of hype around, but I'm reminded of the wise saying that when it comes to technological innovations, we tend to overestimate their impact in the short term and underestimate their impact in the long term. The pace of improvement is remarkable, and even those at the center of these advances seem startled and somewhat alarmed by the power and effectiveness of the latest programs. Last year, the Future of Life Institute released an open letter calling on all AI labs to immediately pause for at least 6 months the training of AI systems more powerful than the latest version, which was GPT-4. The letter, which was signed by a whole group of technical luminaries, including Elon Musk, went on to state that AI systems with human competitive intelligence could pose profound risks to society and humanity, and that advanced AI could represent a momentous change in the history of life on Earth, which needed careful planning and management. The letter said that AI labs were locked in an out-of-control race to develop and deploy ever more powerful digital minds that no one, not even their creators, can understand, predict, or reliably control. And in November last year, political leaders, tech industry figures, and academics met at Bletchley Park in the UK for a 2-day summit on AI. The location is significant because, of course, Bletchley Park was the location at which British codebreakers, including Alan Turing, used first-generation computer technology to break the Nazi Enigma code and hastening the end of the World War II. And so there's no doubt that UK is trying to get into the AI scene internationally and present itself as a place where AI safety issues in particular can be debated. It's hard to comprehend the possible consequences of a world populated by generative AI programs that may shape and influence much of our lives. At the moment, ChatGPT, which is just one of many programs now available, has hundreds of millions of regular users worldwide. The website is currently receiving around 1.7 billion visits per month. It's said that more than a quarter of the UK population have now used a generative AI program, and 1 in 3 US college students are using AI to assist their homework on a regular basis. High school and university level education has been dramatically impacted because plagiarism using these programs has become rife and largely undetectable. So education is having to be reimagined, and a technological arms race is now going on between the fraudsters and those who are trying to detect them. Social media platforms are already deluged with AI-generated content. In January, deepfake nude images of Taylor Swift spread across the internet, and they were downloaded millions of times. And a fake Joe Biden individually telephoned voters in New Hampshire and asked them not to vote. there seems to be a realistic danger that the internet will become flooded with so much false and misleading content that it will become difficult or impossible to distinguish objective truth from sophisticated lies, deepfakes, disinformation. Can democracy itself survive if it becomes impossible to find ways of agreeing between ourselves on what the truth is? However, it's certainly not all doom and gloom. On the positive side, AI is already making an impact in the worlds of healthcare and science, and this is likely to become more and more over the next decades. Just one example, the first AI-generated antibiotic is known as halicin. Yes, you spotted it. The name comes from science fiction, the AI HAL in 2001 Space Odyssey. But halicin is not fiction, it's solid scientific truth. An AI algorithm was trained by analyzing a large library of chemical compounds. It then identified halicin as a new molecule predicted to have strong antibiotic properties. It's now been synthesized, it works in experimental animals, and it's about to enter clinical trials with humans. And there is no doubt there are hundreds more experimental new compounds which AI can identify. So not just in drug development, there are going to be many other areas of healthcare. Just recently, BBC showed this AI image analysis in the NHS in breast cancer. It's already saving lives. There are many, many other examples. And a recent study comparing doctors and AI with real-world diagnostic problems showed that the AI was nearly as good as the human doctors in making the right diagnosis, but it was rather better than the doctors in providing empathic and emotionally sensitive ways of communicating the diagnosis. So how are these AI developments going to disrupt and change employment around the world? Many people see a chill wind blowing through their profession. Copywriters, image and video creators, designers, musicians, coders, even software engineers, we're all being impacted by different versions of generative AI. And of course, it's impossible to predict the likely consequences. As with other tech advances, there will be job roles that will be largely replaced, whilst at the same time, the productivity of many existing knowledge workers will be increased and new employment possibilities will become visible. One of the interesting things is that AI seems to take traditional white-collar professions such as medicine, law, accounting, teaching, banking, and so on, and it disrupts and decomposes these professional roles. Yes, we're still going to need some highly skilled and experienced human beings, but the machines are going to take over a lot of the routine tasks that humans currently do. And if the changes are very rapid, how will society cope when large numbers who may find themselves without prospects of continuing the work they're trained for feel that they're being put on the rubbish heap? So one of the extraordinary truths of the AI revolution is that there appears to be no fundamental limit to the processing power that can be achieved by these machines. Once you're dealing with ones and zeros, there doesn't seem to be any theoretical limit to how powerful this can be. And this is causing increasing concern for many people. So this slide is taken from an academic book by an Oxford professor on the risks to humans posed by superintelligent machines. So on the left is the intelligence level of a mouse, a chimpanzee, the so-called village idiot, a human being of low intelligence, and then Einstein representing the supreme level of intelligence that humans are capable of. So the entire span of human intelligence is between those two arrows. And I leave it to you to decide which arrow you're closer to. But what happens if a superintelligent AI is created whose capabilities are somewhere here? Do we think that this AI is going to be particularly concerned about the best interests of humans, any more than we humans are concerned about the interests of mice? Interestingly, if you adopt a strictly materialist or physicalist understanding of the human brain, that the brain is simply a complex computer made out of brain cells and connections, and that's the position that the majority of technologists and scientists take at the moment, then you have to conclude that everything that has ever come out of the human brain, not just music and cathedrals and wonderful art, but also sadism, massacres, hate, and the most destructive evil that humans are possible of, all that is simply a product of complex wiring and neural networks. So from this perspective, if we create a super intelligent machine, we have every reason to be nervous. And it's the fear of being overtaken by super intelligent systems that's driving Elon Musk and others to find ways of connecting human brains with AI so that we can merge with the machines. Musk has started a company called Neuralink to create brain-computer interfaces, and recently the company announced the first successful trials in a human being. Other neuroscience tech companies around the world are racing to create brain-computer interfaces. This idea is also being taken up by militaries around the world who are working on connecting soldiers to AI systems and hardware sensors. And there's currently an arms race to create technologically enhanced soldiers. What's becoming abundantly clear is that although the technology is new and exciting and rapidly advancing, the entrenched power structures in which the technology is immersed are very old and very powerful. It's a powerful combination of old-fashioned capitalism, driven by greed and fear, coupled with states and militaries who are competing for geopolitical dominance. Many of us watched the movie Oppenheimer. Well, what's going on today has uneasy resonances. We have a new kind of Manhattan Project coming into view. It's totally focused on winning the race to create superhuman-level AI. Because if we don't get there first, our enemies will destroy us. In the prescient words of C.S. Lewis, writing at the end of the Second World War, man's power over nature turns out to be power exerted by some men over other men. Well, the language is rather dated, but we recognize the concept. One of the weaknesses of the technological worldview is that it tends to have no category for genuine evil. In a world of ones and zeros, evil doesn't compute. It's possible to understand programming errors, computer malfunctions, accidental mayhem, but willful human malevolence and wickedness can seem incomprehensible to scientific rationalists. But in Christian thinking, evil is a reality which touches every one of us. As Alexander Solzhenitsyn put it, the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties, but right through every human heart. And there's a very real danger that powerful AI systems will magnify and enhance forms of evil that seem to be embedded in our humanity. But the risks of AI are not only that machines may develop awesome destructive power, there are other risks. And one of them is that our working and personal lives are becoming increasingly infiltrated with simulated persons. Companion bots of different kinds are going to change health and social care. The AI program Replica presents itself as an AI companion who cares. Replica currently has more than 2 million users, and many have said that they believe that they are interacting with a sentient being. Recently, I read a rather poignant piece by a young woman who noted that so many young men had chosen AI-generated girlfriends. You can create a girlfriend who is your dream woman. She won't criticize you. She laughs at all your jokes. She never gets tired or has a headache. And she always thinks you are wonderful. How can a real woman compete with that? As AI becomes more advanced, I'm afraid we're going to see many more simulated persons. There are AI systems which can be trained on all your emails, all your messages and posts. And after you die, an AI version of you will continue to send out emails, respond to posts and recent events. It's a crazy form of eternal digital life. The US television series Westworld is set in an imaginary theme park populated by advanced humanoid robots. And real human beings can come to the theme park to live out their fantasies with the robots. And in an early episode, a human being comes to the theme park for the very first time. And as he arrives, a beautiful young woman comes up to him. and asks him, is there anything I can do for you? And he stares at her and says, are you one of them or are you real? And she replies, if you can't tell, does it matter? Now that's a question which is going to haunt us as we go on into the next decades. If you can't tell the difference between a real human being and a very clever machine, does it matter? There are many people who will argue, no, it doesn't matter. If the simulation is as good as the real thing, if it causes us to experience the same emotions, then why should we be concerned? But for many of us, myself included, truth matters and authenticity matters. So I'm coming to the end, but I want to focus on two fundamental questions which confront us with new relevance. They're old questions which philosophers and sages have been asking for thousands of years, but they've got a new urgency now in 2024. The answers we give to these questions are going to define our human future as we go into the next decades. And the first question is, what does it mean to be human? How can we preserve our unique and precious human identity when machine intellects and simulated persons are everywhere? And the second question is, what hope is there for the future? What kind of world do we want to create? So first, what does it mean to be human? So AI is becoming a kind of distorting mirror in which we attempt to understand what it means to be human. And one of the strange paradoxes is, as the machines become more like humans, the humans seem to be becoming more like machines. We seem to be merging together. So what does it mean to be human? Well, a common answer from scientists and technologists is that fundamentally, human beings are just biological machines. Machines that think. The brain is a meat machine, as Marvin Minsky said. Our bodies are just meat bags, and the software in our brains is demeaningly referred to as wetware. And of course, the implication is that silicon-based intelligence is going to turn out to be fundamentally superior to the messy carbon type that we know and love. What used to be uniquely human was our intelligence. Here's Stephen Hawking. Everything that our civilization has achieved is a product of human intelligence, from learning to master fire, learning to grow food, to understanding the cosmos. I believe there's no difference between what can be achieved by a biological brain and what can be achieved by a computer. It therefore follows that computers can, in theory, emulate human intelligence and exceed it. So there's a simple logic. Everything humans have achieved is due to intelligence. This can now be reproduced in computers, which are constantly getting stronger and more powerful. Therefore, machines will ultimately be capable of copying everything that humans have achieved and more. But the only intelligence we have any deep understanding of is that of human beings. And in case you haven't noticed, we're not information processing machines, we are mammals. Our understanding of and interaction with the world is inextricably intertwined with our embodied mammalian nature, the web of interpersonal relationships we find ourselves within. So it's pretty obvious that machine intelligence is not the same as embodied human intelligence. Historically, Christian thinking has emphasized that human beings are created by God as embodied and holistic beings. This is the famous illustration of the creation of humankind by Michelangelo. Alone amongst all the beings, we are created in God's image. A human life is not only a gift, it's a unique reflection of God's being and character. And in the language of the Bible, we are made out of the dust of the ground. But at the same time, we are given life by the breath of God. In the beautiful and poetic language of Genesis 2, the Lord God formed the man out of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature. Yes, we are dust, but we are dust inspired and energized by the very breath of God himself. And so our embodied physical nature is an essential part of our humanity, which is celebrated and validated by the Christian faith. But then something even more extraordinary is what Christians claim. And that is that the infinite God, creator of the cosmos, chose to take on a physical human nature. In the word of John's Gospel, the Word became flesh. And the Greek word actually is literally the Word became meat. God took on the form of flesh in order to provide the ultimate revelation of his being. So having a body made out of meat can never be seen as an inferior or a substandard form of existence. Not only that, but human beings in God's image are created as persons. And to be a person is to be in relation. The being of a person is derived from the movement of communion, of reaching out to another, from the freedom of giving ourselves to others. And we are locked in relation with the natural world, with one another, and ultimately with the divine. Unlike AI, we are genuinely free. We have the dignity of choice, creativity, and we are held accountable for our choices. We understand the concept of truth, and we hunger to know and build our lives on truth and authenticity. And we are encoded with longings and dreams for a better world and a better humanity. So when we return to this picture, see there's another dimension. In yellow, there's the personhood dimension. And personhood is not the same as intelligence. However powerful the machines become, they cannot have the gift of personhood to reflect the very being and character of God himself. So that's the first crucial question. What does it mean to be human? And here's the second. What hope is there for the future? What are we aiming to achieve? What is the ultimate goal and end game for AI technologies? What kind of world do we wish to create for our children? This is the kind of vision of the future that the techno-optimists create. This is going to be the city of the future. As you can see, the sky is always going to be blue, and people are always smiling, and it's incredibly clean. Techno-optimism creates a vision of the future in which intelligent machines enable every aspect of life to become frictionless. Every desire, every longing, every interest will be satisfied instantly and effortlessly in the techno-enhanced digital and virtual realms. Frustration, struggle, and boredom will be banished from everyday existence. Instead, we're going to be free to fulfill our wildest dreams with the minimum of effort. But is this a future in which physically embodied human beings can flourish and find their ultimate purpose and fulfillment? The Disney film WALL-E is set in a nightmarish future in which the Earth has suffered from ecological disaster and human beings have migrated to spaceships where they're looked after by fleets of robots. And the human beings spend their time playing computer games and staring at screens whilst the robots do the important stuff. And I find this vision of the future both humorous and chilling, because the paradox is that in order for embodied human beings to develop and flourish, it seems that we need resistance, friction, struggle, perseverance, frustration, pain, and suffering. In other words, friction is an essential part of human development, of character formation and flourishing. And so I close with this question: how can powerful AI technology be redeemed? How can it be brought back from its evil possibilities and used to fulfill its amazing potential, to promote human flourishing and the common good and the good of creation? It's clear that there are many dangers and problems as well as opportunities. We're being confronted with challenges and questions. We've never had to face them before. How should we think about a simulated companion? If your elderly loved one develops dementia and feels lonely and abandoned, is there a place for a robotic pet or an AI companion? Or is simulated compassion always inauthentic, misleading, inappropriate? Yes, there are real possibilities that AI systems will magnify human evil. But, you know, it isn't AI, but humans who pose the greatest risk to the future. And in answer to this fear, Christianity brings a message of genuine hope. A message who is a person, the Word who became flesh. It's a challenge to our creativity and vision to reimagine a future in which the machines do not replace us or dehumanize us. Instead, they enhance human community and flourishing. They help us to become more human, not less. What would that future look like? And what must we do to make it possible?
Why I'm Still a Christian. After 2 decades of conversations with skeptics and atheists, the reason I believe. That's the title of my new book, and it's available now. Read my case for faith after a lifetime hosting debates between atheists and Christians. Find out why God makes sense of human existence, value, and purpose, and learn how to respond to some of the toughest objections to faith. This is a book to inspire confidence in Christians and to help seekers explore the claims of Christian faith. Why I'm Still a Christian is available now at justinbrierley.com, where you can also get exclusive signed copies. Or, when you become a gold level supporter of this show, you'll get a free signed copy of both my books. Click the link with today's show info to buy or to support.
Are your business expenses playing hide and seek? With Uber for Business, the small spends that slip through the cracks, like rides and meals, go right where you need them. Because it integrates with leading expense platforms, you can say goodbye to surprise costs, missing dollars, or chasing receipts. Everything's track downable. Uber for Business. Make small steps that make a big impact. Learn more at uber.com/small steps.
Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku, and it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
You've kind of painted a picture of some of the challenges of AI. AI is with us right now. We're using it every day, interacting with it. Before we get to the downside, let's talk about the positives. Just spell out again some of the positives that you think might come with the AI revolution.
Yeah, I think there are some amazing positives, and particularly in healthcare and in science, where AI is able to explore at an extraordinary rate possibilities which would take humans thousands of years. I mean, just in that questing for an antibiotic, I think I read that the system analysed 23 million different possible molecules, testing each one to see how well it fitted. And it all did that in a few hours. And you just think how long it would take human beings to do similar tasks. So I think that's just one example.
I've heard examples, I think you've shared before, of the way it can analyse all kinds of hospital, checks that have been done, X-rays and so on, and arguably more accurately identify the problem than a doctor potentially can.
That's absolutely right. So it turns out that a simple chest X-ray, most of us will have had many chest X-rays in our lives. A chest X-ray can be broken down into millions of pixels, tiny little fragments of a picture. AI systems are going back through chest X-rays looking for patterns, and they're able to diagnose things going on a straight chest X-ray, which no human eye can detect.
Yeah. Wow, it's amazing. So there's lots of potential for good use of AI, but obviously our minds have almost been trained by years and years of sci-fi to kind of think about all the dystopian ways in which it could happen. I mean, what for you are the realities of this? Are we looking at a sort of Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator, convergence event where the robots all take over, or is that really just the realm of sci-fi still?
Well, and the honest answer is nobody really knows. The extraordinary thing to me, and I don't think enough emphasis has been made of this, if you look back in history, what has always happened before is that there's been a technological advance, and then along come the writers and the artists and the playwrights, and they write about it. So you get the Industrial Revolution, happens in the 19th century, and then along comes Dickens and writes novels about it, and so on. But in this particular case, we've had more than 100 years of creative writers and artists and playwrights speculating, writing about what might happen if machines developed that were more intelligent than human beings. And fascinatingly, most of the people working in this technology have been reading the science fiction since they were children, have completely absorbed it into their systems, and they're now trying to make it come true. And so you get this very interesting feedback loop between what the science fiction writers speculated. So apparently, the voice of Alexa, most of us will know what Alexa sounds like. Alexa was designed to sound exactly like the voice of the computer in Star Trek. So if you think about Star Trek and when the photon torpedoes are coming in and all the rest, there's this calm voice in the background telling you what to do. That's Alexa.
I mean, slightly more creepy is if your Alexa sounds like Hal from, 2001: A Space Odyssey. I'm afraid I can't let you do that, Dave.
I think that's the point. So I think, to put it very simplistically, the technology's been trying to make science fiction come true for decades. And it's like now they've suddenly said, oh, hang on a minute, I've just remembered how the story ends. And it's not very good. And so I think a lot of the concern about the Terminator-type super intelligent computer that suddenly goes rogue is really science fiction. But trying to dissect science fiction from science fact is really very difficult.
I mean, some of the present realities, what we know are some of the potential challenges and downsides of AI have been spelt out in your book, in John Lennox's book. Things like kind of this possibility of a surveillance state, and we already see that happening in parts of China. The fact that, in a sense, there's this huge blurring of what is fact and reality, deep fakes, everything else. So is that just a case of, hey, we need to get on top of this, more regulation is needed? Is it the kind of thing you can kind of keep sort of regulated in that way?
It seems to me that surveillance is now everywhere. It's ubiquitous. And in fact, the real difference between China and what's happening here is not really the level of surveillance. The difference is that in China, it seems to be largely controlled by the Communist Party, and it's all about social control. Here, surveillance is being dominated by commercial interests. And
trying to sell you things.
Trying to sell you things, plus the state that is looking for terrorists and security threats. I do wonder whether our historical understandings of privacy are actually now we need to reevaluate. Because if you go back a long time into history, in the medieval village, everybody knew what everybody else was doing. Privacy would be a joke. Everybody knew who was visiting your home and what they were up to and what you were spending your money on. Then with the growth of urbanization, there was perhaps a period in cities when you could persuade yourself you were anonymous and nobody knew what you were up to. And lo and behold, that period seems to be coming to an end. And we're back to the village.
I mean, one of the things you drew out in your presentation was, what can we trust? How do we know what truth is any longer? Do you think we're going to be entering an age where we are just a lot more suspicious of everything, I suppose, because everything could be a scam?
I think that's right. And I think that, in a sense, that level of suspicion is going to be essential if we're going to survive. I mean, and we have to teach our children, we have to teach one another that the sophistication of deceit that is now possible...
That it's probably not Joe Biden on the phone.
It's probably not Joe Biden, but of course it can be much more sophisticated than that. Yeah. So there is already a story which has been apparently well validated of somebody working in a big company who receives an email and he thinks it's a bit strange, but he's asked to take part in a Zoom call. He goes onto the Zoom call, and there apparently are other members of the senior executive team. Wow. And they're asking him to transfer money into an account, and he thinks, well, that's what they want, so he does it, and it then turns out they were all deep fakes.
So extraordinary. Yeah, I mean, how can you possibly compete with that? I mean, it's one thing to know your Auntie Maud isn't in Tenerife asking for a quick cash transfer, but when you've got the whole board in front of you on a Zoom call, it's a different story, isn't it? Wow. I mean, the other thing that really captivated me about what you said was there was that line you quoted from Westworld. If you can't tell the difference, does it matter? And there's so many instances where I think that's happening in our world today. People are basically asking, if you can't tell the difference, does it matter? You briefly touched on some of the things that are happening in the world of healthcare. I know that Japan already has started to use robotic kind of assistance for caring for the elderly and so on. And it's tempting to say, well, as long as people are being cared for, as long as they are having their needs met, does it matter whether it's an AI, a robot, or a human doing it?
Well, I think it's a very, very real and troubling question. Of course, the standard narrative is that there are so many old people that we're going to need to be cared for, and there just simply aren't enough human beings to do the caring. So, of course, we're going to have clever machines to do the caring. Now, of course, if you unpick the narrative a bit, why are there not enough human being carers? Are there not enough human beings on the planet to care for the old people in our midst? And the answer is, well, of course there are. It's just that being a carer is very poorly paid and it's very low status and demeaning and so on. So if we were to change the context, maybe we could make human caring much more attractive so that we didn't need to have so many machines. There's always a wider context, isn't there?
But what's the downside of not having a human involved in that? For those who say, well, it is just more efficient, and you do get the same outcomes. What's the problem?
And I think that is a very real and troubling question. The interesting thing is, I think deep down, my intuition is that there is something of some value in authenticity. And perhaps as a kind of just a thought experiment, suppose it turned out that someone incredibly close to you, suppose it turned out that my wife, Celia, is not exactly who I always thought she was. For 40 years, we've been married. And what I didn't know was that she was actually a Soviet agent in deep cover. and she's just living a facade of being a loving wife. Suppose I go to my grave and I never discover that Celia was a Soviet agent. Does it matter? I thought we had a happy marriage. My instinct is, yes, it does matter, because actually
truth matters.
We were living a lie, and truth matters, yeah. But it is a fundamental question, therefore, how much does truth, authenticity matter? And interestingly, it seems to me that truth, with a capital T, is not a mathematical concept. It's not a matter of data and information and maths. It's a matter of trust between persons. And therefore, persons matter and personal authenticity matters.
I mean, the other area you touched on in your talk about this is online AI girlfriends becoming a popular thing with a certain demographic. Now, that for me just feels so wrong, but I can imagine that becoming kind of normalized in the same way that sort of online dating has become absolutely normal now. Yeah. And people used to say, online dating. Maybe this will become the new norm. But what's the difference between an AI girlfriend and a real girlfriend?
Quite right. Well, let me turn it back to you. I mean, why do you...
Well, I know that my wife
here,
knows there's
I
a
would
difference.
Say that.
I guess the thing for me is the whole idea, as you said in your presentation, an AI girlfriend can probably meet all your needs in one sense, because they will tell you how beautiful you are, and they'll laugh at all your jokes, and they'll meet all of those but that, in a sense, is basically just you receiving a sort of, transaction. It's not a relationship in any meaningful sense, because inevitably, as far as I can see, a relationship is actually about two people coming to know each other and learning to love each other despite often their differences. And that is obviously a very different kind of scenario. So it feels like we've lost any meaningful sense of it being a relationship as soon as you're saying it's just an AI on the other side.
I think that's right. And I think the other aspect is what I referred to at the end about this frictionless idea. I mean, a a relationship with an AI girlfriend is by definition frictionless, isn't it? I mean, it's just so easy. She just thinks I'm wonderful the whole time. And, you know, surprisingly, when we have relationships with real human beings, it isn't quite like that. And we discover, you know, there's misunderstanding and there's disagreement and we struggle to
There's also the small matter of it still at the moment takes two human beings to get together to procreate and for the
we've got technology for that too, don't we?
Oh, well, yeah, I suppose that's true. But I don't know. For me, I guess when I saw the first headline about AI girlfriends, I just thought, oh, come on. And then I've seen it actually gathering pace. And I think it's because we do live in a more individualistic culture where we've already been trained to spend a lot of time on our screens, and that is already the way in which we're engaging with a lot of other humans. So it's only, I guess, a small step to kind of then, if something appears really human, then you might as well say, well, what's the difference, you know? And it's kind of scary, isn't it?
It is scary. I think one helpful distinction is to make a distinction between an AI relationship, quotes, which is somehow therapeutic, which is intended to, which has a definite therapeutic purpose, and a relationship which is just a replacement for a human being. So there's no doubt it's already coming into healthcare that in certain circumstances, interaction with simulated persons can be very therapeutic. Some very interesting work done with children with autistic spectrum disorder, showing that if they work with and interact with a humanoid robot that has a very simplified facial expressions, they can learn how to read faces, which will help them actually in terms of interactions with human beings. And maybe one could think of an older person with dementia, that some kind of AI companion could have a therapeutic, positive benefit in what is, after all, a disease process. So I think I would want to make a distinction between using systems like that with a clear therapeutic level, and another area is mental health, that these systems can provide a kind of cognitive behavioral therapy.
Again, it's where do you draw the line, I suppose, because you're using technology right now. You're wearing a pair of spectacles, and that's a wonderful scientific advance that we developed a few hundred years ago, which we're all glad for, you know, to correct vision. But sort of there's I suppose, a sliding scale. And again, going back to Westworld, I remember the episode where it's focusing on a guy who is evidently having some kind of talking therapy. And it's only sort of some way into the episode you realize this is an AI. It's not a real person who's kind of doing the talking therapy. And yet they're probably saying all the right things because it's very good at responding and knowing what to say. So again, it's that whole question of, well, is that good, or is it wrong that there's not a real person behind that who actually cares about you and cares about the fact that you're suffering and so on?
So one of the key things to me is the level of deception that's going on. And one of the things that has been proposed, and I'm very much in favour of, is what has sometimes been called a robotic red flag. and that is, in the way back when cars first came, you know, along, they had to have a guy with a red flag who went before saying, beware, beware, you know, horseless carriage and so on. And the idea is that by law, any AI system which is pretending to be human has to say every 5 minutes or so, I have to tell you I am not a human being, I'm a machine, I have no feelings, I have no emotions. A bit like the kind of thing that you get in financial services where the spiel by law, which people have to say. I personally think that would be very good. It sort of breaks the illusion.
Yes.
This is not a human being, this is a machine, don't get fooled.
I don't know, my only worry is that some people kind of want to be fooled. You know, they want to live in the illusion because, as you say, the AI girlfriend is easier to live with than a real human being. I mean, this also has a very practical dimension in terms of the fears that are now surfacing around what will this mean for people's jobs. You mentioned that as well. I mean, there's obviously many ways in which technology has already transformed the way we work. But even jobs that I think once people thought of as fairly secure, you know, the real creative jobs, the designers, the writers, even those now, it appears you can get amazing AI creations. You can get Shakespeare from AI that's practically indistinguishable from the Bard, So where do you think we're heading on that? Do you think we're going to, I don't know, is it going to be a rebellion ultimately from the people who say, no, we need to take back our jobs, our creativity and so on?
Again, it's so hard to predict the future, isn't it? And if you talk to pundits on this, you will get the complete spectrum from, the classic optimistic view is, oh yes, but of course, yes, it will destroy jobs, but for every one job it destroys, it will create 5 others. Every technological revolution in the past has always created more jobs. Through to the pessimists who say this time it's different, and that ultimately the AI is going to be able to do most jobs. And in particular, I think there's a great fear it's going to hollow out the middle range of jobs, the sort of jobs which are not absolutely at the pinnacle of sophistication, but are sort of ordinary, everyday 9-to-5 job that gives you a living wage. And that increasingly those kind of jobs are going to get hollowed out. There will be the jobs at the low end of manual and service industries. But what's going to happen? Is there going to be social unrest? Is there going to be...
I suppose I'm also interested in just what it means if we got to a point where we kind of didn't have to create art or music or poetry or films because AI could just kind of do it for you. Do we lose something in terms of what it means to be human almost at that point?
Well, and it's interesting, isn't it? So because in Christian thinking, work is a very central part, isn't it, of what it means to be human. God is depicted as a worker who does the work of creation, and human beings, he puts human beings on the planet to sustain and work at creation. So this is sort of Wall-E view of us lounging around staring at screens is a deeply dehumanizing one. Some people are thinking maybe if there's a universal basic income, everybody gets paid by the state a sort of livable amount, and then basically you're free. You choose how you want to live your life. Maybe volunteering, maybe we'll need to reimagine what volunteering is. Maybe at the moment there's paid professionals and then there's just volunteers, and maybe we need to reimagine volunteering and see that as something you could spend the whole of your life doing voluntary work, but something of great significance. Certainly when you look at all the social problems, you look at the agonies that people, it's hard to imagine that there isn't enough for people to do, but would they do it if they were not being paid?
Another area that I've heard a lot of talk about in recent years is what's sometimes put under the label transhumanism. Now, this is the idea that we're getting to the point where humans can basically upgrade themselves. We're no longer shackled by the limitations of our biology, of our personhood. And I can imagine a lot of people saying, hey, look, it's just the next stage of evolution. It's just the next natural thing that we will maybe get some kind of Neuralink thing going on where we can suddenly do things just with our mind. We can maybe have kind of some kind of genetic change to us that allows us to live far longer. And what's the problem with that, I suppose? What's the problem with kind of transcending our humanity?
Absolutely, and again, it's science fiction, isn't it? These ideas have been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, but now it's almost like the technology is catching up. Personally, I think we're actually seeing quite a lot of low-tech transhumanism, if you like, is already happening. So if you think of cosmetic surgery, you think of transitioning your gender, you think of recreational pharmaceuticals or enhancing your cognitive and so on. The idea that we use technology to enhance our biology, that I don't have to accept this body as I've been given it, that this idea is already here, isn't it?
It's very common already, yeah.
And therefore, the next stage of melding with the machines or finding some way of extending my life beyond 120 years. Fascinatingly, there are a lot of very rich and very frightened old men in Silicon Valley. and they have spent their money. They're billionaires, many of them. They've had their life throwing their money at whatever problem they have, and now the big problem is death, impending death, and I am throwing my money at anything possible to try and extend my life. And what's more, they're already, there's massive research programs going on to extend life.
I guess the question is, what are you extending life for in the end? Because we already live, to a ripe old age compared to many of our ancestors. And I suppose it's that question of, if you've got the idea that actually this is all there is once the brain shuts off, it's over, then there might be a real kind of sense of, actually, we need to break that barrier. We need to kind of become immortal, and we're going to do it through technology. We're going to do it through AI or whatever it is. For me, I suppose there's a deep spiritual question at the heart of that search. It's not just about technology. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I agree with that. And one of the things that you may have noticed when I was talking about what it means to be a human, to be a person, is that one of the features of our personhood is that we have these strange longings and dreams of a better kind of future, and in particular, a better kind of humanity. And it's interesting, why is there such dissatisfaction with our current level of humanity? I mean, I don't think other carbon-based life forms, I don't think your average sort of chimpanzee or dog goes around thinking, I'm so frustrated with being like this. And yet, human beings, we dream, we long to being able to transcend our humanity. And the Christian explanation for that is that actually God has written eternity in our hearts, to use a verse from the scriptures, that we have dreams of a better world. But what Christianity says is that the route there is not through technological enhancement, but actually is through the gateway of death and resurrection beyond.
Which brings us neatly, I suppose, to the Christ at the center of Christianity. Because I think one thing that I found really helpful in your presentation was the fact that if this is true, if Christianity is true, then the central claim is that God became human, not an AI, not a robot, not a piece of technology. Why is that so significant to this question of artificial intelligence?
Yeah, and it's something which has really sort of forced itself on my mind just in the last few years, really, and that is that if you were to talk to many, many people in our society about this kind of virtual future which is being portrayed, where we basically spend all our time with goggles on our faces and living in virtual worlds and surrounded by artificial intelligence and so on, deep down, many, many people would say that cannot be right. That cannot be the right way for humanity. And yet, if you push them and say, what is the reason why, if after all we are just biological machines, computers made out of meat, why is it wrong to end up in this kind of virtual reality? It's very hard, I think, to find a satisfying explanation for why that's the case. And what has come home to me with new force is that, for 2,000 years, the Christian faith has said that God became flesh. And it's like we've known that for 2,000 years, but the import of why that is so important has become newly important in the 21st century. That because God turns himself into this kind of body, it's saying something very profound about our embodied humanity, which an AI ultimately cannot replace.
And going back to that conversation on transhumanism, trying to upgrade ourselves, kind of shed our human limitations, I guess it's significant that God said, no, this is good.
Yeah.
These limitations I have chosen to take upon myself in the person of Jesus. Now, obviously, the Christian claim is that Jesus also was transformed in his resurrection, so that all of the things that, if you like, are the results of sin and so on, fall away at that point. But there's still something good about being embodied, about being human, essentially.
I think that's right. And I think that is a deep, profound mystery. And that's that our limitations, our very limitations, are the frustrations which we have. And as you get older, those frustrations increase. There is something good about our physical embodiment. And it makes me think that human community, face to face, what we're doing now, and what we're doing all of it between us here and now, in physical form, is something that would be recognizable. Human beings have done for thousands and thousands of years. And it is somehow different from the experience that's staring at a screen. It's different from the experience of having the virtual reality goggles. And what that difference is, it's saying something very profound about what it means to be human and the God who turned himself into a human being in order to show us what he was like.
And I think the church, arguably, is fast becoming one of the few places where you can still find genuine human interaction. So many of the other places where that was able to happen at one time, whether it be family groups or communities and so on, they're being kind of disbanded. We're constantly now turning to technology instead of turning towards each other. And I just wonder whether the church is going to find itself in a unique new position of being one place at least where you can find genuine human community. And that can be tough because it requires getting on with each other, learning to love each other despite our differences and flaws. But I just wonder whether there'll be something quite real about that going forward.
And that's the real challenge, isn't it? Because, and I think a tension for many churches and other bodies like that, because the temptation is to join the technology, to turn your church into like a television studio. And how could that possibly happen? And whereas perhaps we should resist that. Perhaps there is something about this old-fashioned, face-to-face, fully analog form of interaction which we must preserve. And isn't it interesting that the Holy Communion or the Eucharist or the Mass for the Catholics, which is at the heart of Christian worship, is the one thing that you cannot do virtually. It has to be physically present and embodied.
So we've heard a lot of the possible downfalls and pitfalls of AI and technology. I'd love us to end on a note of hope in this discussion. What for you, John, is the reason why you have hope in spite of all the ways in which humans can probably screw it up and take us down some nightmarish dystopian future? What gives you hope?
Well, I think it comes back to what we've already said, and that is that I see the incarnation, if you like, as God's final vote of confidence in the original model, humanity. The Mark I human being is what God has said that kind of humanity is going to be, is the most central part of God's purposes. And therefore, I think it's very interesting, isn't it, that in the scriptures, time and time again, when something unexpected and potentially very threatening happens, God appears, and the first thing he says is, don't be afraid. And I just can't help thinking that maybe, and certainly for those of us who are Christian believers and are confronted with the challenges, no, it's not a kind of Pollyanna-ish, don't worry, everything's going to be fine, but there's just this fundamental conviction that God is real and God is in this, and this is all part of the drama.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Summer's here, and you can now get almost anything you need for your sunny days delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parmesan delivered. A cabana? That's a no. But a banana? That's a yes. A nice tan? Sorry, nope. But a box fan? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation between John Wyatt and myself on the promise and perils of AI. To round off this event at All Souls Langham Place in London, hosted by Pillar and Step, we also took questions from the audience, and here's the first one that got asked.
You mentioned the atom bomb, Oppenheimer. Is it similar to AI in that once unleashed, it can't be turned off?
And I think the answer is yes. It's a very good question, but all the evidence is that once these things get out there, in fact, of course, there's a huge difference between AI and nuclear energy, and that is that in order to make a bomb, you need a massive infrastructure of huge industry and all the rest, and therefore it's very hard to conceal that you're doing this, and therefore, ever since the invention of the atomic bomb, there's actually been an international control over the dissemination of nuclear weapons. You cannot do that with AI. AI is something that is on open release. It's spreading across the world. We know that not just in the States, we know that China, countries in the Middle East, Russia, North Korea, they're all involved in this race. And so I think it is. It's unleashed. It's not going to go away.
The genie is out of the bottle.
Yeah.
I suppose the question is, does it make any difference then when these tech giants who are a bit worried about AI say, hey, we need to have a moratorium, we need to slow things down? I mean, you can't necessarily tell that to China.
Well, that's absolutely right. And in fact, you know, I mentioned this call from the Future of Life Institute to stop everything and so on. It didn't happen. The Future of Humanity Institute. So although it's well-meaning, why don't we pause everything and just I just try and think. It does seem there is this out-of-control race going on. And the other really troubling thing is that there's a huge inequality of arms between the tech pioneers and then the regulators. And a lot of it is to do with how much money, the salaries that the tech industry can pay. They are paying footballer-like salaries to the very best computer scientists. And governments and universities simply cannot compete with the concentration of talent, the very best talent that's going on. So there's a real problem, I think, as to how you regulate and control the companies both in the West and elsewhere across the world.
I mean, speaking of inequality, one of the questions here is about, since power corrupts, are we likely to see AI essentially working in favour of the most powerful, the most wealthy, and so on?
Well, I think because of the way that capitalism works, unless it is regulated, there is a natural tendency for it to enhance the most powerful, the richest people on the planet, and therefore to enhance difference. Now, it doesn't have to be like that. And in fact, in many areas, including in healthcare, I can imagine that AI is a kind of democratizing force. I mean, in theory, it's possible for anybody in the planet who has a smartphone to have access to the very best sophisticated healthcare, which until recently was only available from highly trained and very expensive experts. So there is potentially huge democratic and equalizing forces here, but there is nonetheless this tendency to power, for a concentration of power in a very small number of extremely wealthy people.
There's a theological question that's had a lot of upvotes from Hannah, who says, if friction, as you were saying earlier, is necessary for human flourishing, how does that fit with the Christian view of heaven, which in theory has no more friction, i.e. no more sin, suffering or pain? It's a bit of a sort of left field question, but it's quite an interesting one. What do you think of that?
It's an intriguing question, isn't it? And I think that the problem is, perhaps inevitably, all we have is a large amount of speculation about what the future existence, the new heaven and the new earth might be. I think of the verse where it says, what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, what's never entered into human hearts is what God has prepared for those who love him. So even the wildest science fiction speculation is way off compared with the vision of what the new heaven and the new earth might be. The closest we get to it from Christian thinking is the resurrection appearances of Jesus after death. It's the kind of first contact with the physics 2.0 of the new heaven and the new earth. And the extraordinary thing about the risen Jesus is how ordinary his life is. They have this wonderful, if you know the Bible, you'll know that there's this barbecue on the beach that the risen Jesus prepares for his disciples. So it's presented in extraordinarily recognizable human terms, and yet
it's different.
It is different.
Yes. And I mean, what's always struck me is that Jesus still has the marks of his death, the nail marks. And there's something about that suggests to me that whatever that new heaven and new earth is, the struggles we've experienced in this life are going to be somehow bound up into that, but redeemed in some way. And I think there's no reason to think that we'll all be just sitting around on clouds playing harps. I think it's going to be a place where the goodness of work is expressed, creativity. You know, it's not going to be a boring place in that sense. So for me, I think that, friction in the right way, in the kind of, you still have to create and think and, be an imaginative person in that world.
Absolutely. And another aspect of that is that when you take the great drama of the narratives of Scripture, which starts at the beginning of the Bible and goes through all to the end, it's often been said that the story starts in a garden, but it ends in a city. And the city is of the New Jerusalem, which is an extraordinary vision of human community, but where the glory and the honor of the nations are brought in. So it's even speculatively possible to say that the very best of technology, the very best of human creativity is brought into the holy city, the New Jerusalem. Another
slightly theological question, but in a different way. Will AI replace God?
I'm reminded of, there's a famous science fiction short story where the scientists create the world's most powerful supercomputer in order to address the question, is there a God? And eventually they switch on the supercomputer and they type it in, is there a God? And it whirs away and it says, there is now. So I think this idea that super intelligent beings could take on a kind of quasi-divine status. Those ideas are there in science fiction. And from a Christian perspective, we would see this as a form of idolatry, isn't it? It's to take a product of human hands and then invest it with some kind of spiritual significance. That's something that human beings have been doing from time immemorial.
So in a sense, yes, it could become a god, but it'll be like all the other gods, a false god in that sense.
A false god, but a very powerful god, because one of the bizarre things about idolatry, both ancient idolatry and modern idolatry, is that the thing we create from human hands suddenly starts to exert some power over us.
Yeah, you start to look like the gods you worship. And another interesting question here, and it's on sort of some of the social media that we use these days. Someone's saying that now on Snapchat, which is very popular with a lot of young people, there's a sort of AI response. And what is that going to do to younger generations as they increasingly just naturally start to interact with AI chatbots and things in that kind of way?
Well, speaking as a paediatrician, this is something of huge concern, I think, for everybody who's concerned about child development. Because, surprise, surprise, it turns out that human beings, human children, are designed to interact with a three-dimensional world. I mean, who would have thought it? They actually seem to be designed to explore and reach out. And they're also designed to reach out and touch a human face and start to engage with this other human person And when you change all that, and instead the child's experiences of a two-dimensional screen, that fundamentally changes. There's already neuroscientific evidence of how that changes the nature of brain development. And so I feel very concerned about the potential adverse effects of children being exposed to AIs from early on. There is already now a move starting amongst people in this space to say that 16 years of age is a kind of cutoff at which human beings get to a degree of emotional, intellectual, neuroscientific maturity to be able to engage with social media, to engage with the internet and so on, and that before then it would be much better for children if they were not, and if they were engaging in the old-fashioned way. Now try telling that to your teenagers, but I think the evidence is increasing. I suspect future generations will look back at us and say, how could you have been mad enough to allow young children to be exposed to this stuff?
I mean, just keeping with the realms of what could be, someone asks this, if people are genuinely having boyfriend-girlfriend relationships with AI these days, could marriage between AI and humans be legalized one day? Just asking for a friend, they say.
Yeah, well, I think, yeah, anything's possible, and maybe it'll get wildly attractive. And then the question is, what about polyamory? You know, I mean, should you be faithful to your AI, or would you be allowed to have more than one?
Wow, there's all kinds of crazy questions that engenders. If we think humans are fundamentally different to AI, one person asks, that there's a personhood dimension to humans, are there things that AI won't be able to do, can't achieve? Are there things we could say, no, I know that's an AI and not a human?
That's a really interesting question, isn't it? I'm not sure I know the answer, apart from at the deepest intuitive level. I think in terms of demonstrating, you know, there's a fascinating question which is related to this, is could an AI be conscious? Could an AI actually have consciousness in the way that we know of our own existence and awareness? And the honest answer is we will never know, because we can never know what it means, what it's like to be a computer. And therefore, sooner or later, we're going to have AI systems that claim to be conscious, that claim to have all the experiences, even that may claim to suffer pain. There are people out there who are saying, if that happens, and I suspect it'll happen within a matter of years, we're going to have to create committees where these systems are going to be assessed and analyzed to see whether they reach the criteria to be granted legal personhood. If they do, then they're going to have machine rights. We're not going to be allowed to switch them off without their consent. We're not going to be allowed to cause them suffering. We mustn't work them too hard. They're going to have enough time for rest. And they're probably going to have a vote and be part of a democratic service. You may all think this is mad. There are people who are already planning for that eventuality. And the problem is, how will we ever know? So,
this leads on perfectly to a question here. It's been asked a couple of different times, but it's how soon will AI be truly intelligent with its own will, with free will? I mean, like you say, could we even know, I suppose, is the question.
I mean, ultimately, I think these things are very, very sophisticated simulations. But as I was trying to give it the personhood dimension, there's a different aspect of being human. And if you go back to the things I mentioned, the fact that we are locked in relationships, whether we like it or not, we have fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters and friends and so on. We are actually aware of a greater reality, of a morality, good and evil. We understand truth. We have a longing for truth. And we have this longing and questing for something better. Now, none of those are authentic to the machines. The machines can simulate it, but they are not essential to the nature of what it means to be a human being. So I think this is why we need to think more deeply, don't we, about the uniqueness of humanity, the specialness of humanity. And that's why these old themes about human beings made in God's image, human beings being unique and so on, suddenly have a new relevance, don't they, to this period?
They do. Now, there's quite a few questions with a common theme that are quite popular here. One of them says, will AI provoke the end of humankind? But there are others asking it with a more of a theological spin, saying, is AI the Antichrist? Are these sort of something to do with the book of Revelation and so on? So, and there is a kind of apocalyptic kind of dimension to this. You've already mentioned the sci-fi films and things. So it's no wonder that people kind of relate it to these sorts of things. I mean, is that going beyond what we know, that the AI signals some kind of big departure in world affairs, could be the end of humankind, could be signs of the end and so on?
Well, if you just take what is often now called existential risks to the human race, you know, there are thinkers out there and they have a list of things like an asteroid collision, nuclear holocaust. You know, what are the things that could completely annihilate the human race? Another would be a global pandemic, climate change, which would make the planet completely uninhabitable. And we've added now the fifth one, which is AI. And so it is there on the list.
It's amazing that about 4 of those 5 are all human-invented things, ways we've invented to possibly wipe ourselves out.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And so I think there are people out there who are thinking these kind of apocalyptic thoughts and how we might protect ourselves as human beings from this ultimate catastrophe. I personally think that this is science fiction and that we have much more to fear from evil human beings who get control of these systems and use them for their own evil human purposes, than that the systems themselves are going to go rogue. How does this relate to, you know, the book of Revelation and to our understanding? I mean, you know, the first thing to say as a kind of health warning is that if you know anything about church history, you know that Christians have been predicting the end times and the Antichrist for 2,000 years. And there's always been a kind of industry of saying this is the end of the world and these are the signs of the times and so on. So I think one has to be extremely cautious. I mean, having said that, there are one of the fascinating things which comes up in the book of Revelation is the idea of a deception which is so profound and so clever that it could deceive even the very elect, as I think in the words of the Bible. And so this idea of the threat of counterfeit, the threat of deception, has always been there. There's always been deceivers. There have always been those who have been apparently good and have turned out to be deceptive. I think that AI gives new power to the deceivers, new power. And in some way, it's the deception of good, the deception of compassion and empathy and care and all those kind of things, some of these very precious human realities. It's the counterfeit of that which worries me more than the killer robots.
There's a lot of questions about jobs and security and that kind of thing. Here's one who says, what hope is there for future generations with AI replacing all the jobs? What would motivate a young person to get educated, go to university, work hard, or get a job? A very practical question. What do you think that's going to be the end result of what AI does?
Well, I do think these are very real questions, particularly for young people. And, you know, it used to be said not very long ago that if you really want to educate your children and prepare them for the future, the most important thing is to teach them programming, coding, teach them maths and science. It's now turning out that these systems are particularly good at programming themselves and coding, and that perhaps we're going to need far fewer human beings to do this than we thought. So it is incredibly difficult to look into the future. I think that, having said that, developing a real deep understanding. These systems have a kind of superficial understanding of reality. They don't really have that kind of deep mastery which human beings can develop. And I suspect that there's always going to be a place for human beings who develop deep understandings of skills and abilities and creativity. And the caring professions, it's very hard to believe that the ability to care for others, the ability to teach and encourage others, that these kind of skills are going to go out of fashion. So I think it's important to give hope to the next generation. One of the biggest risks is a wave of fatalism and despair, isn't it, among young people, which is deeply concerning. And equipping children, to giving them this resilience, this perseverance, the character traits, I think, are always going to be valuable. And that comes from human-to-human interaction. Maybe children need their parents even ever more. One of the sad things I see so often is a young child maybe being held or in a buggy who's desperately trying to get the attention of their mother or their father, and the mother or the father is staring at a screen. And what message are we giving to our children if we're not there for them and understand how face-to-face interaction is the most important?
Someone's sent in a question saying, I'm a founder who is building an AI-driven health startup and using AI to help build this. How do I start to apply the values, ethics, and guardrails that you're talking about into my startup? So that's a really, again, practical question. What, for someone who's literally using this technology, what does the Christian faith, I suppose, have to say to how we go about doing that?
Well, I think those are exactly the right questions, and it needs to be a discussion, doesn't it? How do we need to be part of these discussions? How do we code AI systems which are actually good for humanity, which encourage our personhood, which encourage relationships, which encourage face-to-face interactions? Is it possible to code systems not just to maximize profit, not just to maximize engagement and eyeballs, but actually to encourage human flourishing? I think I don't have any simple stick answers, but I think the questions are absolutely right. Interestingly, there are lots of people, Christians and other people of faith and goodwill, who are all working in the tech industry. And they want to go to work and believe that what they're doing, what they're spending all their time doing in front of a computer screen, is actually they're doing it for good. They don't want to just be fostering the profits of some other billionaire somewhere in Silicon Valley. So there is a real hunger amongst tech workers to know how to use their skills in AI for good. And I think, churches and Christian communities ought to be encouraging workers in the tech industry and saying, we're supporting you, we want to be part of this conversation.
Yeah, and I get a sense, again, from some of the questions coming in, that there's some people who are a bit worried that the church and Christians can sometimes be a bit, it's all terrible and, we need to avoid this. When someone's asking here, isn't the greater risk by far that we will underuse new technology and miss out on some kind of greater flourishing?
Well, I think there is a risk there. I think, the reaction of the Amish in the States has always been to try and withdraw and retain a previous form of technology. I think it's not true that they're completely opposed to technology, but they're very, very critical about how technology might affect their community. I think the future is not in withdrawal, not in kind of protection, but it is in a really thoughtful understanding engagement. I think one of the most important things, to be honest, is that we all need to develop AI literacy. This is, and in a way, this event might be seen as an initial attempt to try to encourage people in AI literacy. These developments are so basic, so important, that really we all need to know and get ourselves up to speed so that we can be part of the conversation.
I mean, you've sort of hinted at it there, but there's another great question here, which says, as the church, rather than sit by and watch this happen, how can we be part of influencing and shaping AI and other web technologies?
Absolutely. I think there is a problem here, and that is so many people in positions of authority in the church leaders and so on, are people who basically study the humanities at school and university. They gave up science at the age of 16. They're not interested in any of this. They're not interested in science fiction. So it's hardly surprising that many church leaders are going to struggle when it comes to engaging with this stuff. And that makes me feel that actually it's the people in the tech industry who are also believers, who are there in the church. These people become a very, very significant resource, because we really can't expect the church leaders to be able to guide us. We need people together working in the industry who will be part of the solution and not just part of the problem.
Maybe a final question. When and how should we start using AI in church? Is there a place for AI in church? An AI priest, I've heard of the thing, but again, it's kind of sends chills down my spine, but...
Yeah. I think what's much closer to home is, how much are people using ChatGPT and things like this just in normal church activities?
To write their sermons. Yeah.
Bible study outlines, discussion groups. And the answer is a huge amount. The reality is people are, often unthinkingly, and I find that really scary. And I think this is why AI literacy, helping to educate people in the nature of these systems and what they're trained on, and then how to use them for good, is really important. So I personally think that we should be very cautious about using these very sophisticated large language models and so on, because we don't know what the origin of the text is. And at the moment, I'm pretty keen to say that everything that I produce is authentically steam-powered human creation for the time being.
Including this excellent booklet, which you wrote for this evening's event. And do take that home with you, have a read, pass it on to someone maybe. But thank you so much, John, for spending some time talking to us, guiding us through these really quite tricky conversations. And it's something I'm sure we're going to return to in due course, because this is the age we're living through, and God calls us to be faithful and follow him through it. But can we have another round of applause?
Thanks so much. Yeah.
Well, what great questions those were from a capacity audience at All Souls Langham Place to round out today's show. Thanks again to Pillar and Step for permission to rebroadcast that event here on the Surprising Rebirth podcast. And you can find links to more of their events with today's show. Thanks as ever for listening today, and a shout out to Levi the Sermonator for his 5-star review, saying, "I'm so thankful for this podcast. It's been one of the highlights of my entire year. I've learned more from this than I thought possible, and it's undoubtedly become an inspiration in moving me towards the passions I already had for Christian imagination formation through storytelling and poetry." Well, if you can share today's show with someone, or like Levi, rate and review us too, it does help others to discover the surprising rebirth of belief in God. There are also links with today's show to my newsletter. Subscribe today and you'll get the first chapter of my book. And of course, when you support my work through Patreon or US tax deductible giving, you get early access episodes and bonus content. In fact, we've just released my full interview with Sharon Dirks, the Christian thinker and neuroscientist we featured in season 1 of the podcast. My conversation with Sharon on consciousness and the soul is the perfect complement to today's show on AI. And again, that's exclusively available to monthly supporters. If you go the extra step of becoming a gold supporter, I'll also send you signed copies of both my books, and you'll be invited to a monthly catch-up call with me. The links to support are with the info. Coming up next time.
But is there something that the Orthodox Church has done to try to attract these people? There's not. The Orthodox Church hasn't done anything to bring these people in. In fact, one of the people that commented said this: "I can only speak for our mission. We haven't changed anything to make this happen or to try to draw them. It's just happening."
The Eastern Orthodox Church in the USA has been experiencing a surprising rebirth in the past 2 years, along with stories of marked growth in parts of the Catholic Church. I'll be speaking to some key voices, including Bishop Robert Barron and Father Andrew Damick, and converts too, as we explore the Orthodox Catholic revival. As ever, you can listen to that episode right now if you start supporting today. Early access to podcast episodes is one of the perks of being a silver or gold supporter. And as mentioned, right now you can get that exclusive access to my full conversation with neuroscientist Sharon Dirks. The links are with the podcast info. Today's show was a production of Think Faith in partnership with Genexus and the Jerusalem Trust. Editing assistance from Isaac Simmons. You can also find it on video over at our YouTube channel or our website. That's think.faith. See you next time.
How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
This episode is brought to you by GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco. Get the most out of your vehicle with GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco original equipment. The only parts designed, engineered, tested, and backed by General Motors. You can find your perfect fit for most makes and models and choose from 3 tiers of parts, including GM OE or gold and silver aftermarket parts. Visit gmparts.com for more information.
Don't be left in the dark. Find out about our latest shows, upcoming events, and recent articles by subscribing to my Think Faith newsletter. It'll arrive once a fortnight, and I'll even send you the first chapters of both my books, Why I'm Still a Christian and The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, for free when you sign up. And if you want to support this show, you'll get early access to episodes and bonus content when you become a silver supporter. Gold level supporters also get signed copies of both those books and the chance for a monthly catch-up with me. Your support makes a huge difference. The links for the newsletter or to support are with the show info, or go to justinbrierley.com.